The story began when I received an invitation from my distant cousin, Gilbert, a man I had only met a few times in my life. He lived alone in an old mansion in the northern mountains of Vermont, where the snow lay thick all winter. The letter was handwritten in black ink, the script shaky but still clearly legible, inviting me to a Christmas party with several other relatives whose names I had never heard. I should have refused. But at the time, I had just lost my job and broken up with my girlfriend, and I needed a place to escape the bitter cold of New York City and my painful memories. The thought of a week in a warm, well-served mansion was irresistible. I drove up to Vermont on December 20th. The winding dirt road leading to the mansion twisted through a snow-covered pine forest. The trees stood still like white ghosts in the dense fog. The mansion appeared after the last bend, a three-story Victorian building with a pointed roof and tall windows, looking like a giant monster sleeping soundly under a blanket of white snow. Gilbert greeted me at the door. He was much older than I remembered, his hair white and his skin wrinkled like old paper. His pale blue eyes looked at me strangely, as if trying to recognize someone through my face. Inside, the mansion was warm and sumptuously decorated for Christmas. A giant Christmas tree stood in the middle of the living room, hung with lights and ornaments. The fireplace roared, radiating a pleasant heat. But something was wrong. The house was too quiet. I saw no one else but Gilbert and an old butler named Morris. Gilbert explained that the others would arrive in the next few days. He led me up to my room on the second floor, a large room with a four-poster bed and windows overlooking the forest behind the house. When he left me alone, I noticed there was no phone in the room, and my mobile phone had no signal. The first night passed peacefully. I slept soundly in the comfortable bed, only occasionally waking up to the sound of the wind whistling through the window crack. But the next morning, when I looked outside, I saw footprints in the snow leading from the forest all the way to directly beneath my bedroom window. The footprints were large, deep, like those of a heavy man. But the strange thing was that they only led to the window, not back. I asked Gilbert about this at breakfast. He looked at me oddly and said it was probably Morris checking around the house. But Morris was a frail old man unable to leave such deep footprints. On the 22nd, still no one arrived. Gilbert began to behave strangely. He often stood staring at an old family portrait hanging in the living room, his lips moving as if talking to someone. I noticed the painting included a blond boy standing next to a young man who looked exactly like Gilbert. That night, I was woken by heavy footsteps in the hallway. Through the crack in the door, I saw a tall, dark shadow pass by. It wasn't Gilbert or Morris. This person was much taller and more muscular. I held my breath, waiting for the figure to pass, my heart pounding like a drum. The next morning, I decided to leave. But when I went down to the garage, I found my car wouldn't start. Gilbert said a blizzard was coming and the roads would be blocked for a few days. I was stuck. On the 23rd, Morris disappeared. Gilbert said he had gone to visit family, but I saw Morris's belongings were still in his room, and I began to smell a strange odor coming from the basement, a metallic, bloody smell mixed with something rotten. That evening, after Gilbert had gone to bed, I crept down to the basement. The old wooden stairs led down into the cold darkness. The stench was overwhelming. I turned on my phone flashlight, the weak beam illuminating a large space full of dusty old items. In the farthest corner, I found a heavy iron door. Inside was a small room with dry bloodstains splattered on the floor and walls. In the middle of the room was a wooden chair with chains and handcuffs. The walls were covered with photos of men, women, and children I didn't know, all with panicked expressions. Finally, I saw the photo that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. It was a picture of me taken through my bedroom window last night as I slept. I turned to flee, but Gilbert was standing blocking the doorway. In the dark, his face was grotesquely distorted. He smiled, his yellowed teeth gleaming under the flashlight. He told me that every year for Christmas he invited a distant relative here, lonely people who would be forgotten if they disappeared. He spoke of his son who had drowned at the age of 10 on Christmas Eve 30 years ago and a manic obsession to bring him back. He believed that if he sacrificed enough people of the same bloodline, the boy would be resurrected. Morris was not a butler. He was an adopted boy Gilbert had taken in years ago, trained to be his accomplice. And now Morris was somewhere in the darkness, waiting. I shoved Gilbert and ran up the stairs. Heavy footsteps pursued me from behind. I ran out, straight into the blinding snow forest. The cold was biting, but I dared not stop. I ran all night through the woods, lost and exhausted. When the sun rose, I found a road and luckily encountered a patrol car. The police returned to the mansion but found neither Gilbert nor Morris. The basement was empty, clean as if nothing had ever been there. They said I had hallucinations due to the cold and stress. Gilbert was found dead in his bedroom, a stroke, according to the forensic report. Morris did not exist in any records, but I know what I saw was real. And every Christmas, when the snow begins to fall, I still see Gilbert's distorted face through the window, still hear heavy footsteps in the dark hallway, still smell the metallic blood from a basement that doesn't exist. They say memory can be distorted by fear, but fear can also open doors to a truth the sane mind never wants to see. And the truth about the mansion in Vermont, about the faces hidden beyond the white snow, still haunts me like an inescapable curse. This Christmas, I received another letter. No sender's address, just a single line of shaky handwriting in black ink. The boy is still waiting. I burned the letter, but the ashes flew up in the wind, forming the shape of a child's face, grinning with sharp teeth. And I know that no matter where I run, the ghosts of Vermont will never let me go. I came to this cabin to seek silence, but what I found was its echo. November brought winter earlier than usual. The trail leading up the mountain was partly covered by the first snow of the season, crunching under the wheels of my old pickup truck. All around, there was only the silent pine forest and an expanse of white stretching to the horizon. The cabin appeared at the end of the road, small and solitary, a dark dot on a vast oil painting. It belonged to my grandfather, a place he used for hunting each winter until he no longer had the strength. Now it was mine, a refuge to escape from the fragments of the life I had left behind in the city. Inside, the air was cold and thick with the smell of old wood and faint wood smoke. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. The white sheets draped over the furniture looked like sleeping ghosts. I spent the whole afternoon cleaning, starting the fireplace, and organizing the food supplies, enough for at least 2 months. As the fire roared to life in the hearth, dancing and licking at the dry logs, a sense of false peace slowly crept into my mind. The crackling of the wood was the only sound that broke the absolute silence of the mountains. That night, I slept deeply, the first dreamless sleep I'd had in months. The first few days passed slowly. I spent my time reading, walking in the nearby forest, and chopping more firewood. The snow grew thicker each day, erasing all tracks, turning the world around me into a pristine, untouched land. The solitude at that time felt like a warm blanket, shielding me from painful memories. I thought I could stay here forever in this white silence. Until one morning, I saw it. A small wooden figure, crudely carved, was lying amidst the old firewood I had just brought in from the shed. It was only about as tall as my hand, with no face, just rough lines suggesting a human form. Perhaps it was an old toy, or an unfinished piece by my grandfather. I didn't think much of it, just brushed off the snow clinging to it, and placed it on the mantelpiece, next to some dry pine cones used for decoration. Life went on as before, but something had changed. The silence no longer brought a sense of peace. It became heavy, expectant. Sometimes, while reading, I would suddenly look up, feeling as if someone was watching me from the window. But when I looked, I only saw the snowflakes falling silently and the motionless pine forest. I told myself it was just the prolonged solitude affecting my nerves. Then I started to notice the wooden figure. Every morning when I woke up, I would find it in a slightly different position than the night before. Just a very small change, a different angle, or shifted a little to the left. At first, I thought it was due to the vibrations of the wooden floor as I moved around. But it kept happening. I started to feel uneasy. One night, before going to sleep, I intentionally laid it on its side. The next morning, it was standing upright, facing the armchair where I usually sat. The feeling of being watched grew more and more distinct. I no longer dared to walk in the forest. The smallest sound from outside, a branch breaking under the weight of the snow, the wind whistling through a crack in the door, made me jump. I began to lock all the doors, even during the day. The cabin was no longer a safe haven. It had become a cage, and I didn't know if I was locking myself in or trying to keep something outside from getting in. One afternoon, as I was looking out the window, I saw a figure dash past the line of trees in the distance. Just a black shadow, very fast, almost blending in with the pine trunks. My heart pounded in my chest. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. There was nothing there, just snow and trees. Had I imagined it? Or was there really someone out there watching me, a lost hunter, or someone living in seclusion on this mountain? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the armchair, my eyes fixed on the fire in the hearth and the wooden figure on the stone mantel. The flickering firelight cast its shadow on the wall, elongated and distorted, looking like a living creature, stirring. Questions swirled in my head. Who was the figure I saw? Why were they here? Did they have anything to do with the wooden figure? I decided I had to find out the truth. The next morning, despite my fear, I put on a warm coat, boots, and carrying a small axe, stepped outside. The snow had stopped falling. The sky was gray and heavy. I walked towards the trees where I had seen the shadow the day before. There were no footprints. The snow was thick and smooth with no sign of life. I walked around for a long time, searching for any trace, no matter how small. But it was useless. The confusion and fear within me grew. Was it all just my imagination? Had the solitude truly eroded my sanity to this extent? When I returned to the cabin, a chill ran down my spine. The front door, which I was sure I had shut firmly, was now slightly ajar. I entered cautiously, my hand tightening on the axe handle. It was eerily quiet inside. I checked every room, from the bedroom to the kitchen. No one was there, everything was in its place. Except for one thing. On the floor, right in the middle of the living room, were wet patches of melting snow, forming the shape of bare footprints. They led from the front door straight to the fireplace and then stopped. And the wooden figure was gone. I stood frozen, feeling as if the blood in my veins had turned to ice. Someone had been in the house. Someone who walked barefoot in the snow, entered my house, took the wooden figure, and left without another trace. The fear was no longer vague. It was real, tangible, and very close. I had no choice but to leave. Immediately. I hastily grabbed a few essentials, throwing them into the pickup truck. I didn't dare stay here another second. As the engine started, shattering the deadly silence, I glanced at the cabin one last time in the rearview mirror, and then I saw it. Standing in the living room window where I used to sit and look out was a figure. Tall, thin, motionless. I couldn't see the face, but I knew it was the one who had been in my house. And in that figure's hand was the small wooden doll. It was holding the doll up as if waving me goodbye, or perhaps showing me that I had left a part of myself behind. I slammed on the gas, the truck speeding down the slippery, snow-covered road. I didn't dare look back again. I just drove and drove until the city appeared with its warm lights. But I knew that even though I had escaped that mountain, I would never escape the memory of it. Sometimes on cold winter nights, when I hear the wind whistling outside my window, I get the feeling that someone is watching me. And I wonder again, who was that shadow in the cabin? A ghost? A madman? Or just a product of an imagination destroyed by solitude? I have no answer. I only know one thing for sure. On the mantelpiece of my mind, there is always an empty space. A space where the wooden figure once sat, and now it is out there in the white snow, along with a piece of my sanity that I have lost forever. The first snow of the season came earlier than usual. It didn't arrive as a gentle harbinger, but descended in a white fury, burying the valley under a thick blanket of ice in a single night. To me, it was no bother. My house and workshop were isolated, perched on a slope overlooking a town rarely visited, even on the sunniest of summer days. Winter was merely a legitimate excuse for my solitude to become absolute. My work demands silence. I am a taxidermist, a profession that people often view with a mixture of curiosity and a little dread. But they don't understand. They don't see the beauty in granting death the form of eternal life, in freezing a perfect moment to make it last through time. Every stitch, every thread, every smoothing of the skin over the clay form was an act of defiance against decay. I found solace in that immutable order. That morning, after the blizzard, a local hunter knocked on my door. He rarely spoke, a quality I appreciated. This time was no different. He just silently placed a large canvas sack on my porch and left. His breath plumed in thick white clouds, dissipating into the frigid air. I dragged the sack inside. When I opened it, I almost held my breath. Inside was a snow fox, but not an ordinary one. It was larger than any I had ever seen, and its fur was perfect. A pure, pristine white, without a single stain, without a single tear. The hunter must have been incredibly skilled. I turned it over, searching for the mark of a bullet or the wound from a trap. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. Its body was cold and stiff from the frost, its eyes wide open, as clear as two shards of glass. It looked as if it had simply fallen asleep in the snow and drifted into an eternal slumber. It was a work of art by nature, and now it was mine to complete. I canceled all my other orders. This fox deserved my entire focus. I laid it on the stainless steel operating table under the pale yellow light of the hanging lamp. My whole world shrank to the four walls of my workshop, to the smell of chemicals and the silence of death. The first stage is always the most meticulous. I used a sharp scalpel to make a long, shallow incision along its belly. Its skin was cold and soft beneath my fingers. I carefully separated the skin from the layers of fat and muscle, a job that required absolute patience. Any hurried movement could ruin this flawless hide. Bit by bit, I removed its white cloak, revealing the naked body beneath. The process was like a ritual, a discovery of a creature's deepest secret. After tanning the hide, I began to sculpt. This is when the real artistry begins. I don't simply stuff a hollow shell. I must recreate every muscle fiber, every sinew, the curve of the spine. I used clay, wood, and wire to build a frame, an artificial soul. I spent hours studying photographs of snow foxes, observing their gait, their stalking posture, the way they tilt their heads when listening. I wanted it not just to look alive, but to possess the spirit of life. I chose a curled-up pose for it, its head resting on its front paws, its tail wrapped around its body, a posture of rest, of absolute peace, a state I longed for but had never achieved. Day and night merged into one. I forgot to eat, forgot to sleep. A cold cup of coffee sat untouched on the table next to the gleaming tools. My only sustenance was concentration. I only left the workshop to venture into the snow-covered forest behind the house, searching for a rotten tree stump of a suitable shape to serve as a base for my creation. The freezing air made my lungs ache, but my mind was filled only with the image of the fox. As I pulled the perfectly treated skin over the frame, I felt a strange connection. The skin fit snugly, as if it were born to envelop the form I had created. I used a specialized needle and thread to sew up the incision on its belly. The stitches were so small that they were barely visible to the naked eye, hidden beneath the thick fur. I stroked the coat, feeling its softness and density. It was more real than life itself. Life is full of imperfections, of clumsy movements, of unsteady breaths. But this fox, it was stillness. It was eternal perfection. The final step was the eyes. This was the detail that determined the soul of the piece. I had a whole collection of glass eyes, handcrafted in Germany, in all sizes and colors. I carefully selected a pair of pale amber eyes with deep black pupils. I gently placed them in the sockets, adjusting the angle until I achieved a distant gaze, both wary and dreamy. When I stepped back to admire my work, an unprecedented sense of satisfaction swelled in my chest. The fox lay there on the rotten stump, a winter king in its silent kingdom. It was hauntingly beautiful. Its glass eyes seemed to look right through me, not judging, not demanding, simply observing. I placed it in the most honored corner of the workshop, where the light from the window could illuminate its white fur during the day. But I soon realized I couldn't be away from it. I started bringing it into the house. I set it by the fireplace, then moved it to my bedroom. I found myself talking to it, not with words, but with thoughts. I told it about the chaos of the outside world, about my disappointment with a life so fragile and flawed. It listened, motionless and perfect. My obsession grew. I began to compare myself to it. I looked at my own hands, my thin fingers with calluses and small scars from careless moments with my tools. I saw the faint blue veins pulsing gently beneath the skin. I felt my own heartbeat, an irregular sound, an unsettled vibration. I saw myself as weak, imperfect. My body was a fragile machine, constantly demanding food, sleep, air, a machine that was slowly decaying. One evening, while sitting across from it, I spilled a glass of water on the floor. A clumsy act, a mistake, a wave of anger and self-loathing washed over me. Why couldn't I possess its grace, its stillness? Why was I bound to this flawed body? It was then that an idea flashed through my mind, an idea as cold and clear as a shard of ice. I am an artist. I have spent my life pursuing perfection, granting the dead an eternal beauty. But my greatest work was not the fox. It was just practice. My greatest masterpiece had to be myself. I returned to the workshop. The moonlight shone through the window, casting a thin silver layer on the steel tools. They lay still on the table, gleaming. Scalpels, forceps, needles, thread, the things that had helped me create perfection. I looked at my reflection on the blade of a knife, a gaunt face, eyes sunken from lack of sleep, a living creature, breathing, decaying, an imperfect specimen. I knew what I had to do. The process would demand absolute precision, a deep understanding of anatomy that I had accumulated over many years. It would be the pinnacle of my art. I chose a pose for myself, sitting on the wooden chair, back straight, hands on my thighs, eyes looking straight ahead toward the window where the snow was still falling silently. A posture of acceptance, of final peace. The work began. There was no hesitation, no fear, only the cold concentration of an artist performing the final touches on his life's masterpiece. I was both the artist and the artwork. I was the creator and the material. Outside, the snow fell thicker, erasing all footprints, blanketing the world in a white silence. Inside the workshop, under the moonlight, a new form was being created, a form that would never feel hunger, never grow tired, never make a mistake, a perfect specimen, motionless, eternal, just like the snow fox watching silently from its pedestal. Uh, the winter has arrived, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold and a heavy, pervasive silence. I work the night shift at a dilapidated, isolated maintenance facility deep in the northern suburbs. The job involves watching over an abandoned complex of warehouses and factories, a place where almost no one ventures. I took this job for the generous pay, enough to cover my student life and save a little, especially during these harsh winter months. I am the only employee on the night shift. The stillness of the place allows me to catch up on some personal work, like organizing notes or reading materials. My workspace is a small office where the fluorescent light overhead buzzes annoyingly, and the air carries the scent of damp, old grease and a faint residual smell of alcohol and disinfectant from the factory's operational days. It's 2 a.m. The long, deserted corridor only has the sound of wind whistling through the door cracks, the very faint beeping of old monitoring equipment from a distance, and occasionally the echo of my own footsteps on the floor. The entire building seems to have fallen into a deep sleep. I'm trying to stay awake, telling myself that this will be another quiet, predictable night. But the peace did not last. Suddenly, a sharp, wet sound echoed like fingernails fiercely scraping on a rough surface, breaking the familiar quiet rhythm. I stopped all activity, held my breath, and listened. I turned my head, expecting to see something appear from the dark corner behind the door, but there was only heavy darkness and a feeling of an all too solid emptiness lurking. I tried to reassure myself, perhaps it was just the natural expansion and contraction of the building structure in the cold night. I hit the pause button on my work and stood up, trying to regulate my breathing. As I stepped back, something in the reflection on the glass cabinet in front of me caught my attention. Filthy footprints. They were not the boot prints of a worker, but dragging marks, stretching from the main corridor towards the old storage room where I was heading. My heart pounded harder, but I tried not to panic. Maybe it was the warehouse manager or someone who got lost. I gripped my phone in my trembling hand and slowly walked towards the storage room. My shoes squeaked on the cold, silent floor. A sense of unease swelled in my chest. The closer I got, the colder I felt than usual. The flashlight from my phone only illuminated a few steps. The wet footprints were still clearly visible on the floor, but they stopped abruptly halfway. There was no water leak or running faucet, just the stains and absolute silence. I quickly backed away without fully turning, returning to the corridor. I just wanted to get back to the office, finish my shift, and escape this area as soon as possible. But just as I was about to turn away, my security office door slammed shut with a loud bang, making me jump. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. Wind, I thought. That's absurd. These doors are very heavy, and there couldn't have been such a strong draft. Immediately after, another wet, sharp sound echoed in the corridor, like fingernails running along glass, causing my stomach to involuntarily clench. I slowly retreated, avoiding turning my back. Then I saw a shadow. It darted past one of the frosted glass windows, moving on all fours, faster than normal speed. It was a blur, rushing past a door behind, too quick to be a normal person. Adrenaline immediately surged. My heart hammered like a drum. I lunged into the nearest empty office I could find. I twisted the lock, bolted the door, and curled up in a pitch-dark corner with only the flickering light of my phone in hand. Suddenly there was a loud pounding on the door. My body was flooded with fear. I screamed in my mind but couldn't utter a sound. I felt the door shake with each impact. I knew the lock was about to give way. I frantically dialed the police with shaking hands. I aimed the phone's light at the door. The doorknob started turning rapidly. The lock began to crack. Outside, I heard hoarse voices. "What should we do with him?" one voice rang out. "Play with him a bit, then we'll see," the second voice replied. The door began to groan, and a large crack appeared in the wood. They were trying to break the door down. In a moment of desperation, I looked around the dark room. I picked up an old rusty metal bar lying next to the filing cabinet. It was my only weapon. The door burst open. Immediately, a black, hooded figure lunged into the room. The man was shockingly thin, his face smeared with mud and his hair disheveled. He rushed towards me at an incredible speed, his eyes staring like two empty black holes, full of madness. I didn't think. A strong survival instinct surged. I swung the metal bar and struck his face hard. He fell down, his body convulsing. The second man was advancing into the room. I didn't want to be cornered. I quickly crawled backward out the door, darting into the dark corridor. I heard their footsteps chasing behind, getting closer and closer. My lungs burned, and I felt my legs were about to collapse. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. As I ran down the long corridor, the electric lights began to sequentially turn off, one after another, leaving everything in thick darkness. They had cut the power. In the dark, I stumbled and fell face first onto the floor. I looked up. The first thin man was standing there, silent, just staring and waiting. His gaunt, pale face and deranged expression made him look no different from a walking corpse. My body froze solid. Then I heard the sound of tires crunching on snow and a police siren from afar. Luck had smiled upon me. The siren panicked the attackers. They looked at each other. "Let's go!" I heard the second man's voice, low and urgent. They didn't bother with me anymore. I saw the thin man back away, and in a second, both disappeared into the darkness and the snowy woods. I lay there, my heart pounding, until a police officer found me, unconscious in the corridor near the main entrance. I woke up. My face was scraped, and my hands and legs were full of injuries. The police found no one else, no footprints except for the marks already erased by the snow, and no seriously damaged doors. I recounted everything, describing the aggression and the gaunt, deranged appearance of the attackers. The police later discovered that the factory complex was being monitored by a local criminal group attempting to retrieve a cache of banned chemicals hidden there, likely for drug production. I was lucky to survive. I gave up night shifts in isolated places. Now I work during the daytime in a more crowded location. But that experience remains deeply ingrained in my mind. I always feel uneasy, as if those filthy footprints are still imprinted in the darkness, and sometimes, if I stare at a window for too long, I have the feeling that someone is looking back at me, waiting for an opportunity to drag me into their despair.